Well, good morning. Welcome to Debbie's Back Porch. So glad to have you with us. You may have noticed that I've been doing a series on puff pastries, making it, using it. I did the easy puff pastry last week. Today I'm doing a classic puff pastry. And you know, there are several recipes for this, so we're going to take them one at a time. Here are the ingredients for this recipe for classic puff pastry. It's pretty simple. You can pause and write them down. And I would love it if you would give us a thumbs up and subscribe. And if you click the little bell icon on the top right, you'll get a notice when I post new videos 2 or 3 times a week. Now let's start baking. I'm going to use a scale for the ingredients because the ratio for a classic puff pastry is a pound of flour, a pound of butter, 10 ounces of water, and then 1.5 teaspoons full of salt. So I'm going to set this little scale. You just put your bowl on it and then hit the on, and it'll go to 0. And then I'm going to add flour. For this recipe, I'm using bread flour. And that's different. I usually use pastry flour, but I'm going to try this recipe using bread flour because many people do it that way, and I want to see how it works. And while I'm doing this and weighing the water for 10 ounces, let me just throw in a little funny I think of all the time. I see people always saying, to be a professional baker, you must weigh the ingredients. You must weigh your flour. And then later on in the recipe, they will say, add enough flour until it's at the right texture. So I'm sure that it's right that you should weigh your ingredients, but I just almost never do. I use cups. But for this, I'm going to follow the directions. I'm weighing it. I'm weighing out now 10 ounces of water, and what you won't see is that I'm adding 1 tablespoonful of lemon juice to this water. And then I'm going to add 1.5 teaspoons of salt. I'm using kosher salt. And I'm also going to add a teaspoonful of diastatic malt barley powder. Now this is optional. If you don't have it, don't let that hold you back from making this puff pastry. But I have just found that it gives pastries and breads a little, I don't know, it browns a little bit better. It's a little more elastic. It's not very expensive and it lasts a long time. So I ordered it a while back and I use it. Now I've got my KitchenAid out and I'm using the paddle and I'm just mixing this all together, adding the water a little slowly just until it comes together. You'll notice I don't have my dough hook in, and you can, by the way, mix this by hand. It's not hard. That's another point of disagreement between bakers. Some people say you're going to knead this dough. Some people don't. I'll do a little bit of kneading it by hand, but not a whole lot. This is, of all the recipes I've found, the simplest and easiest. And when it comes together like this, I'm going to turn it out on my floured board. Now this is a very rough and shaggy dough. I've got a good bit of flour here. And I'm just going to roll it around and play with it a little bit until I can form it into a nice, fairly smooth ball. And at this point, because this is a new recipe, I'm wondering, I thought this would be a little creamier and a little more moist, but it turns out really well. And so I guess this is how it was supposed to be. I want to work a little flour into it until it is not sticky, doesn't stick to my hands. I can form it into a ball. And this is another illustration of what I was saying earlier. Weigh out precisely 1 pound of flour and then work enough flour into it until it's not sticky to your hands. So anyway, I'll let that go. So now it's not sticky. I'm going to sort of flatten it out a little bit in a ball and then flatten it out. And then I'm going to make a deep cut both ways across the top. we're going to let this dough rest a good long while, and it will hydrate and get smoother. And cutting it, opening it up, will help. Help that hydration, help it rest. And then I'm going to put it in the fridge, and unlike normal practice, I'm not putting plastic over it. This is a damp, just a barely damp, clean dish towel. You want to let it rest anywhere from about 20 minutes to an hour. And now we're going to make our barrage. The dough is called the détrempe, and this is called the barrage. So I have 4 sticks of butter in plastic wrap, and I'm going to just beat heck out of it. And I'm using my rolling pin. That's really about the easiest thing. This was very cold butter, by the way, and the water that I used was very cold water. I took it right out of the fridge. This takes a little while, and I have found that beating it with something, the rolling pin is what I have handy. Sometimes I use a meat pounder, but I think for this, I've got such a big piece of butter, I'm going to use the rolling pin. And I've got my cutting board here so that I can flip it around. And I beat it in one direction for a while, and then I'll beat it in another direction, and then I'll turn it 90 degrees and beat it in another direction. I'm trying to keep it as close to a square as I can. And I don't have any particular measurement for length and width, but I want to make it about a 1/2 inch thick. So I'll beat it all 4 ways, and then I'm going to take the rolling pin and smooth it a little. And this really doesn't take all that much time, maybe 5-6 minutes. As I roll it out, if I start to lose my square, I'll take my dough scraper and I'll cut it and move it back into a square. As I say, this doesn't have to be perfect, but it's easier to handle if you have it in a square. So my goal here is to make an even thickness, or as close to an even thickness as I can get, and to push it back into this approximate square. And here I'll show you how I move it back into the right shape. I'm just going to take this dough scraper and trim off the wild parts, the parts that have moved out of the square, and put it in the middle or anywhere I think it might not be quite thick enough. And you want to do this as quickly as you can because you want your butter to stay as cold as you can. And I have it at about the right thickness. I'm going to do one last little trim here. And you'll see why I'm kind of struggling to keep it right into, or to keep it close to, a square shape when we start putting the détrempe and the barrage together. See the thickness I've got there? It's about a 1/2 inch. And let me flatten that out just a little bit. And then I'm going to roll over it a little bit to get rid of those little grooves. Which is probably not necessary, but makes me feel better. And when I get this rolled, I'm going to wrap it up in this plastic and set it on a plate and put it in the fridge for probably 20 to 30 minutes. What we're trying to do is to get the dough and the butter at about the same temperature. Now we're going to roll out the dough, and I'm going to apologize for my lighting this time of day. I just have a horrible time with my lighting. My kitchen's fairly small. I don't have a lot of space, and there's a window there that I can't fully cover. So it messes with my lighting. Anyway, now we're going to turn this out, and I have a lot of flour here, and I'm going to roll this out. And there is a specific way that you want to roll this out, and I'm going right in the middle right now, but after I get it spread out a little bit, you're going to see me avoid the center. I'm going to move my rolling pin just off center, and I'm going to leave the center just a little thicker than the rest of it. And I'm rolling this out in 4 directions because I want to make a kind of a clover leaf design. And I'm so sorry for that shadow. I'm going to move things around here in a minute, but I'm aiming for a sort of cloverleaf design, and you can see I've left a little hump right there in the middle because that's where we're going to put the butter, and we want to make sure that our butter doesn't go through. So I'm sort of making a little downhill slope here with the dough, not trying to get it even, but intentionally leaving a bump in the middle. So I'm going to test my butter just to make sure that I've got the dough big enough. I'm going to give it another couple rolls to make it just a little bit bigger. I want to make sure that when I fold it, the butter is totally encased. And we're about there. I just want to ensure that. So you see that sort of clover leaf. And I think we're about there. So I'm going to unwrap this. I'm going to save the plastic because I'm going to use it several times. And you can see that that butter is really firm. And we place it right in the center, and then we're going to fold over. You can see how I'm folding it over so that I have plenty of space to fully cover the butter. And I just try to roll it out big enough that I don't have to stretch that dough at all because it's kind of elastic and I don't want it pulling back. Now I'm going to spread out some more flour, and I'm going to work really quickly here because we want to work quick enough that our butter doesn't start to melt and come through. So I'm just doing that to seal that flap there. And then I'm going to take my rolling pin again, and I'm going to start beating. And I'm going to start in the middle and beat it outward. And that moves the butter out in the pocket, and it spreads as the dough spreads. This is why we need to have them at about the same temperature. And I beat it first, and then I roll it. And I'm going to roll this out to the width of my glass cutting board here, which is 22 inches. And I'm not going to worry about how wide it is. I'm only going to worry about how long it is, because we've got several folds to do, and we'll get it into the shape we want as we go along. For right now, I'm just spreading it out and rolling it. And I'm sort of coaxing it, if you can see. I'm not pressing so very hard. I'm just doing it slowly so that I move the butter as I go. Make sure it's not stuck. A little more flour. Run it a little more. You don't want it to stick, because if it sticks, it's going to pull loose from the butter. And our whole goal here is to make sure that the butter doesn't bleed through the dough at all. And I do want to show you this whole process here for this first turn. Brush all the excess flour off. If you have too much flour on it, the layers won't stick to each other. They won't adhere. So you want to be careful to brush it off. And then we're going to do a fold. A third. Brush it again. and then the other third. And that is the first turn. So I'm going to go ahead and do the second turn because my dough is still nice and chilled. And you know, if it were summertime and my kitchen were warm, I would only do one turn at a time. And if your butter starts to come through or your dough feels tacky, stop and refrigerate for 30 minutes before you do the second turn. But usually in a cool kitchen, you can do 2 turns at a time before you refrigerate. Now I'm going to roll mostly in one direction. I'm getting a little narrow there in the middle, so I may roll the other direction a little bit. Right now, the most important thing is quickness. We want to work quickly so we can get this back in the fridge. I'm getting that narrow spot out. This doesn't have to be an exact rectangle, but you do want to keep it pretty close to that shape. I've got it about 22 inches long. When I even that side up a little bit, that will finish this turn. Going to push back on it a little bit and get you a better view. Okay, another fold, a third. Wait, I forgot. Brush it. Very important, and I almost forgot. Brush off your excess. Fold it. And fold it. Now see that uneven end? The reason I'm not worried about it is because in a little bit, it's going to be flattened out and get folded inside. I'm going to put 2 little fingerprints there to remind me that I've done 2 turns. I'm going to wrap this back up. This is my butter plastic. Put it back in the fridge, 30 minutes to an hour. Wrap it good and tight so it doesn't dry out, and then put it on a plate or something flat or a cookie sheet, whatever will keep it flat. I'll be back in about an hour. That's 2 turns. Now I'm back and I'm going to show you the state of the dough right now, how it's much smoother and easier to work with, but I'm not going to show you all the turns. I'll do turn 3 and 4 now, then I'll refrigerate it again, and then I will be back when I'm finishing up turn 5 and 6. Okay, we're finishing up here. This is the end of turn 6. When I get this folded now, we'll be done, and I'll come back in another video and we'll make something wonderful, maybe a cheese Danish, maybe a bacon and brie puff pastry. But what you have now is finished dough ready to go. This is 2.5 pounds. It's actually just a little over 2.5 pounds. That's 5 normal portions. And when I actually start cooking with this, I'll show you the right way to cut it and roll it out. This looks good to me. I'm going to wrap it back up in the plastic, and then I'm going to put the whole thing into a gallon bag. This will keep in the fridge for 3 days, maybe 4, and it'll keep in the freezer for a good 3 months. So go ahead and make it. It's a big portion, but it's not too much. Once you start cooking with it, you're going to want to have it on hand all the time. Thank you for joining us. Hope to see you again tomorrow.